forget a lot of the skills. Matter of fact, today is ACT and SAT day for me for my private tutoring. I do a lot of that on Sundays. And today we're going over basic formulas. Does it
Wow.
seem elementary? Yes. But is it needed? Of course. Because simple formulas um, are sometimes forgotten. And then the time, as you stated, 60 minutes, 60 questions. Will give students a review when using their calculator to remember the keystrokes, which adds to time and accuracy for questions. Yes, the first 30 questions are most important. And um, today, my practice for today, one of the questions asked about prime factorization. And we know that's a fifth, sixth grade level skill, and that's being modest. Now, with common core math, they're learning that at earlier age. But if you have not been reacquainted with that and those terms used in your studies, um, it can be difficult. So my push in education right now is the maintenance of skills. Um, Oftentimes in math classes, we teach geometry or algebra in isolation. We never go back to revisit the foundational things. And so with my students in tutoring, I find that sometimes simple fractions can be a problem for them. So that the whole thing with the math and the confidence is that two, we have to make sure that the foundation is there so that they can go ahead to the next level and not be in pre-calculus, missing algebra skills.
Cool. That's a great point. You know, one things that we don't realize is, you know, how much some of the things that you learn in, you know, in middle school, elementary school, that they transfer into higher level classes. Because I mean, otherwise they could, you know, put all of those classes in front of you, math classes in front of you, and tell you pick one, choose whichever one you want, and start with it. And it doesn't work that way when it comes to math. You know, it's you start with, if you start with algebra one, you expect algebra two to be a little bit, you know, kind of like continuation of algebra one. And the things add up. One another point that you mentioned too, Doctor, that I really like is the part about the point that you made about people, sometimes they learn the things so long ago. They learn geometry in ninth grade, and they start taking the ACT or the SAT in 12th grade. If that's the case, a lot of times, you know, you'll forget some of the stuff. And there is a different skill that required, and I don't know if you guys are familiar or like seeing that there's a different skill that's required to take the exam compared to taking the class and passing it. Is a very, very different skill. And um and what I think students don't understand a lot of time is, um sometimes it you might know the question and you might know how to do it a certain way, but that's not the most efficient way to do it when you under time constraint, very, very, very restricted time constraint. And uh, and, and I think that's what it's important for you, for people, for, you know, kids in general, to be familiar with the way that you would do the problem under this, under 60 minutes. What's the best way, what's the most efficient way to do this problem in 1 minute? And sometimes, and in some of the questions, especially like in the SAT, that I've seen is, if they give you like a graph, a lot of the times the things are very proportional. So if you find a distance that end up being two x, if you find a distance on the graph that's 1x, it's two times that distance. And a lot of times I think kids miss that. In general, you miss the fact that, hey, you might be able to do this problem in 15 different ways, but this is the one way that you can do it under 1 minute, and also, move on to the next problem. I don't know if you guys had anything to add to that. Laura, I know you have some experience in, especially, with ACT. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Laura or Dr. J.
I just agree. It seems like Dr. J and I are on the same page with those basic foundational skills. And I see the same thing, that the students who are having the higher scores have gifted classes, or, you know, they had their Algebra 1 in 7th or 8th grade. They may have had their geometry freshman year, and the basic foundational skills, when you can, you know, talk to the students about that, and they realize that it's an easy fix. One of the things that I noticed on your profile is that you talk about that test anxiety and that math anxiety, or on the other side, math confidence. And the other important thing, and we can talk to the parents about this, is that we are building their math confidence when they realize they got a question wrong, and it was like a 1 or 2 minute fix of just refreshing those basic skills. So I think we're all on the same page with that.
One thing that I'd like to add to, in the state of Florida, a person can graduate from high school, go to state college, leave state college, go to university, or some state colleges offer an education degree, but they can matriculate all the way through being a certified teacher and never take the ACT or SAT. And I think that's the hindrance to students, because in their teaching, they are not relating and using the vocabulary, the academic vocabulary required to assist students in being successful on these standardized tests. So you can't teach what you've never taken, one. And then two, the training within educational systems when it comes to ACT and SAT, yes, we give the SAT school day, and we tell the students that it's reportable. And then we have another one where students can take to get concordance scores for graduation. Yet we have courses that are reading-based courses, but nothing for math that is related to math. And then even with that, the teachers don't get proper training. So all of my test prep training has come through my business and things that I have thought out on my own. And I think that's not good for students. And that's why through the years, if you look at the data, we have saw a decline in the scores of students across the board. And it's not just BIPOC students, but we're talking every demographic, male and female. So that's just my 2 cents about that here in Florida.
Oh wow, that's a good point. I had no idea that was possible. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on is I've seen this very recently, and it looks like, you know, since the pandemic, there is I don't think some of the colleges and universities are not putting a whole lot of emphasis on ACT and SAT prep, like the scores actually to get student enroll. I was wondering if you guys hear some stuff about that, and you know what are you guys are doing in your area that way that you make sure that your kids are prepared, because that's normally it would be like, okay, this is, you're ready for college because you scored a 26 or 27 on ACT math. So I was wondering if that's something that you guys hear about, and what are you doing to make sure that your kids are prepared for that, especially if you are in that space too, especially you, Laura, who actually, you know, breathe that stuff. So what do you have you heard stuff like that? Have you seen like a decrease in the number of students that used to come to you for ACT and stuff like that, Laura?
Have I seen a decrease in the number of students who come to me for the ACT? No, not at all. I'm in Louisiana now, but I know exactly what you're talking about in Florida. And we give the ACT as a school day test as well. And now Florida has Bright Futures, and Louisiana has TOPS, which is kind of like Bright Futures. And I find that most of my business is students not as concerned about acceptance into school because, you know, of what Dr. J said about they can get into school, especially if they go to one of the state schools or community colleges that that are open admissions, but what they want is to get their school paid for. So they want to reach that minimum score, and that's where I get most of my business.
Oh, cool. All right, that's a different way to look at it as well too. I don't want to mess up your name. Is it Lavaine? I know she just joined us as a. She's also an educator. Would you introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about the stuff that you do and yeah, I don't want to mess up your name, and if I butcher it, let me know too. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I am Laverne Thatch. I go. My students refer to me as call me Dr. Thatch. Um, all I do, I'm a tutor. That's what I do every day, every week, and so on. That's all I do. And I tutor mostly mathematics, but I've done all the other subject areas as well. It all depends on the students and what the parents want. And regarding the ACT and SAT, yes, that has been going around a lot, that they're not required anymore for college, especially for the next 2 years because of COVID. Some schools are not. But I still tell my students that they should prepare and take the SAT and ACT because it does give them a chance to say, yes, I can think in a way that shows my readiness for college. I can do work in a way that shows my readiness for college and, my willingness to be there and do the hard work. Because that's all about what comes in play in the ISIC. Because when I look at the SAT and the types of questions and the way the questions are being asked, they're not necessarily saying, I want you to go from beginning to end and give me an answer. They're asking you to think about what is going on, read the question carefully, and answer what is being asked. Because sometimes they ask you for what's going to go on in the middle, the end, or maybe even just beginning. So it's all about how you think. So if they're measuring how you think, they also say, are you ready for a college level course or to do college level work? And I'm not saying because a student passed the SAT, he or she is always ready. They're not always ready. Sometimes some people are just very good test takers. They don't get nervous, or their parents providing them access to tutors that will help them get ready, so they scored well. So there's so many intrinsic factors that go into how students perform in these exams. And yes, we can tell the ones, then also too, the ones who are ready, the ones who are not ready. And in the state of Florida, I didn't know that fact, that's how teachers can get through a program, because I thought that if they did not take the SAT or the ACT, they can do what is called a PERT, which is sort of a lower version of those exams, but they still have to do reading, they still have to do mathematics, and the mathematics go from pre-algebra to algebra to maybe a small bit of trigonometry, which is similar to the SAT. But the way the questions on the part that are asked, similar, I think they are more to the point of ACT, where ACT is asking you to go from beginning to the question to the end of the question, because the ACT is more subject area specific. So if you're going to school to study engineering, there's no way you're trying to get into that college without taking the ACT, because you have to show that you're ready for the science, and you have to show that your readiness for the mathematics. And like I said, the PERT test sort of goes along in line with that. Go from beginning to end, show me you can answer these questions, sort of thing. So I think that's where my train of thought is taking me right now. Hopefully it made some sense to you guys.
Cool. Thank you. And I wanted to ask this question and as a segue to what we're talking about is, what are some challenges that you guys see, as educators? What are some things that you see that's very common and repeated when you start teaching a child math specifically? What is some things that you what also some of the stuff that you do either to raise the confidence or to get rid of that problem. And I would say, um and for example, you might get a child that comes and say, hey, you know, I don't know math and I can't do it, and I refuse to do it, you know, and there's not, and this is someone that you can't really get around them. You can't. So like when you present with that challenge that somebody is just not willing to learn how to do the stuff, and in your head it's like easy, I can teach you how to do it. In your head it's very easy, I'll teach you how to do it. How do you deal with things like that? How do you deal with a child not refusing to learn math and refusing to do things that will eventually increase their confidence and make them a little bit better about it? Dr. J, if you could, Dr. Green Johns, if you could talk a little bit about that in your experience, how does that work, from tutoring or teaching any kids? How do you deal with them refusing to learn a certain subject?
Thankfully, I've never really had that problem. I think when a family or student or parents decide that they are going to invest in tutoring, um, the decision is already made. One of the things that I have found, I mean, I can usually build relationships with the student, and um, I don't have major problems with that. My biggest problem comes from within school. I prefer that my students get a TI 84 or 83 to use with math on the standardized test. Well, most schools tell the students no. They use TI 30s, like in geometry classes here in Florida. And you and I both know that's not what they need. So I find myself teaching a lot of strategy using these calculators in my tutoring sessions, um, along with other tricks of the trade for test prep versus just focusing on hardcore, this is how you work out the problem. So.
Cool, that's a great point. I remember I used to take some of exams, and if you didn't have the right calculator, if you didn't have, let's say that they say for this specific exam, you have to use, let me see, I have a calculator in front of me, TI 30XS. The exams that I used to take, actuarial exam, I don't know if you guys are familiar with those. Like for the first exam, the probability and statistics is what it's about. And if you don't have that TI 30XS, I can almost guarantee you will not be able to pass. And like I was saying, there is a certain way to solve the problems and know how to solve it, but there's another way to solve it on the 1 minute, to make sure that you solve it in a certain way that where you don't use a whole lot of time to solve it. And I find that calculator plays a big role in that. The different type of calculator that you use will either fail you. And that goes, not all of them are the same, and some of them are like for financial. There was another exam called financial mathematics, and if you don't have that calculator that they specifically tell you, there's a list of them, but if you don't have that one that's recommended, you will probably spend a whole lot of time doing things in very, very, very hard way where you can punch in the calculator and they give you the answer. And I don't know, Laura, do you have anything to add to that in terms of, how do you deal with challenges when it's hard for kids to learn a certain subject and they either refuse to learn it or they have challenges with it, and how do you deal with that to increase their confidence? And
I agree. I've never found them refusing to learn something, especially same thing that was said, if they hire a tutor, we already make sure that they're our ideal client and that the family understands, and there's certain agreements that we have. But I definitely deal with students who have trouble, because that's why they come to us, right? So they know they have trouble learning a subject. And I think the social emotional learning kind of the anxiety, that it's so important. And if any like parents are listening to this, as far as trying to find a tutor, it is so important that you find a tutor who connects with your child and treats your child respectfully and affirms the small steps of growth. So if I see a student who is having trouble with a level of instruction, I'll dial that back and put some learning supports in there and find the place where that student can have some successes. Then we celebrate those successes, and of course they are the supports are designed to get them to where they need to be. We just break them down to smaller steps and figure out. A key is having that student feel safe so that they can share with me their thinking process. And I like to tell them, okay, you made an error here, but it's really good that you made that error right here with me, because we can break down your thinking process and we can figure out, and let me tell you that you are not the only one who makes this error, right? All of us who teach ACT or SAT, we're using the same materials over and over again for ourselves, and we can say immediately, we know what wrong answer the student is likely to pick, right? So we can let them know, everybody chooses this wrong answer. Here's the thinking. Here's why the question makes you think that's the right answer. Let's analyze how it looks right. And now let's talk about the proper way. There's a lot of importance with teacher think aloud. So we walk through that. I do, you try, I do, we do, you try, you do, so that the student then gets to it on their own eventually after hearing the proper strategy.
Cool. That's good. Anybody else want to add anything to this?
Like you said, I don't necessarily get the students that come in that do not want to learn, but I do get students who are afraid that they cannot learn and that they cannot learn at a level that they're expected to. And many times that turns out to be that the foundation that was built has many holes in it. It's not firm. It's not stable. What am I talking about? Like, for example, when I have a student for geometry or algebra 2, or even pre-calculus or calculus, I sometimes have to bring them back to the pre-algebra and algebra and show them where all of this was preparation for where they are now. So they do know how to do it. Maybe they just don't know how to trace back from where they are back to where they first learned it, and break it down from the smaller pieces and then build it back up to the more complex and strategic need for understanding the basics to build to make sense of what is going on here. I think I made that a bit too convoluted. Anyway, but so go back. I said sometimes like what you're learning in, what they're doing in pre-calculus can be traced back to something they learned in pre-algebra. And they were like, how does that make sense? And I said, yes, it does. Because think about when you first learned 1 + 1 is 2. Or, 3 + 2 is 5, and so on and so on. I said, those facts about mathematics don't change because you're doing calculus or pre-calculus. Those are still there. So there are many things in your pre-algebra that lends itself to what is going on in your pre-calculus or even in your trigonometry. So I want you to see those smaller pieces to make sense of the bigger pieces.
Nice. Great. Thank you. And I saw Khalid. I don't know if I mess up your name.
No, that's absolutely fine, Grimmel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I wanted I wanted you
Yeah,
to.
my name's Khalid. I'm from the UK, actually. I've been in the education space for over a decade here now. Run multiple companies, for IT training companies primarily. We are actually working on an edtech startup now. So the idea basically is to put the school education online. So this is a great room. I've actually been looking for something like this, but I've been looking for almost 2 weeks now. But it's been very difficult to find one. So as soon as I saw it, I was like completely amazed, and just went in straight away. So so basically, what we're trying to do is put the whole of primary and secondary school here in the UK online. The idea is to make it very interactive, very engaging. Essentially, sort of looking at three areas that we are trying to obviously improve using the technology. First is the pedagogy, the training methodology of it. So we are basically planning to sort of create very high quality videos with sort of VFX, 3D graphics, and every other technology that we can bring in to make the content very, very engaging and very, very interesting for the child. And number two is the curriculum itself. We're trying to see, what else we can add apart from the traditional curriculum that is being taught in the schools, because we know that it's not changed much, to be honest, in ages. So we're trying to see how we can improve. We're looking at where we are headed, because it's all technology now. That's in about next 10 years time, God knows what's going to happen. Apparently there's a talk that there will be no universities in 10 years time, because that's where we are headed, because it's going to be more problem solving, critical thinking, those sort of areas that are going to be having a lot of importance. So we're looking at the curriculum, and the third is the one size fits all approach that we have in our schools. You put a bunch of kids in a class, and but we know that every child has a different learning capability. They don't learn in a similar way. So we're trying to see if we can create these personalized learning journeys for every children based on their behavior, based on how they perform in different quizzes that we'll be having on the platforms. So we're at a very early stage. We're just sort of looking for feedbacks. We're sort of interacting with the industry, the teachers like you, trying to understand what is the best way to basically do it. So I'm just here to get some feedback. In fact, we actually, our MVP, which is the minimum viable product that we are launching, is actually going to be on maths. So it'll be great to hear your feedback, what you think, how we can make it sort of the best product out there, or what are the challenges that you face in your sort of daily lives in the schools or when you're teaching children.
Cool, that's great. Khalid, are you guys using something similar to, I think Facebook owns a company, I think it's called Oculus or something related to that. It's like a 3D online school. Like it's not only like math classes, but it seems like it has other classes.
I mean, Facebook has invested quite a bit of money. There are a few platforms, but they are very traditional platforms. So basically what they've done is whatever's happening in the tuition market, what they've done is basically just replicated that and made that online. But we are going a step further than that, and we're sort of looking sort of into the whole education system and seeing how can we improve this whole thing, because it really needs a bit of an overhaul, to be honest. I mean, the way where things are headed. I mean, we're still teaching kids, who's the 15th president, for example. What are the 7 continents? I mean, these are obsolete things. I mean, I was just reading on TechCrunch the other day that most of these big companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, and all these tech companies, 30 to 40% of their workforce, they don't really have degrees. So how they recruit people is completely based on problem solving and the critical thinking aspect of it. And that is not something that is happening in our schools at the moment. I mean, we're just creating workers. We box them, we tell them, this is what you have to do, and that's where it ends. So there's no project-based learning. So we're not creating thinkers. I mean, if you think about it, the whole school system came out of the Industrial Revolution, and the whole point was that we need to create workers. And that's the mentality that sort of, that's what we've carried on since then. So there hasn't been, not much has happened in the K-12 space, in the whole sort of foundations of the whole education system. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, we are doing that, but we're going much deeper into the whole sort of system, so to speak.
Nice, pretty cool. Because I think recently somebody mentioned that, and I went in their site and saw that they were doing something different. And good to have you here, man. And I hope you can, get some stuff, some insight from this conversation. There's a lot of great educators here, people who are doing great things in your own space. So I hope
Yeah,
that
absolutely love it. Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
that we can
So
help
we
you.
will feedback.
Yeah, anybody from the audience, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll bring you up. Either you are an educator or a parent, we'll bring you up and if you can ask whatever questions you may have. Um, I wanted to shift to continue what we were talking about earlier too. One of the things that I like to do with kids, and I think that will back up what some of you guys were saying, is like you were saying, you trace back. Another thing that I think is important, two things that I really think is important when you teaching them, especially math. The first one is being able to show them like little step by step stuff. So let's say that I do an equation. So you can learn algebra any different way. Let's say I do an equation 2x is equal to 5 and I ask them to solve for x. The next step, the next equation, if I solve that in front of them and show them, okay, this is how you do it. The next one that I introduce to them is very, very similar to this. It's like a carbon copy of it. You can erase the 2 and replace it by a 3 and erase the 5 and replace it by a 7. So, and then eventually what's going to happen is you build up on that. And it probably take a little bit more time, but the child in his mind or her mind, he or she understand that, I from this step, if I have this in front of me, this is how I solve it. If I have this case in front of me, this is how I solve it. And I think that's very different from somebody who just introduced how to solve equation with one unknown. There's could be very different variation of it. You can have one unknown, but like, the x could be on the left side of the equality and the right, as well as on the right side. There are many different ways that you can, different ways that you can solve for it. So and this is first thing that I do, give them a little step by step way. So the way that I do it, you would do this, I show you how to solve this problem and you do something similar to it, and it's easy. And that helps increase, and in my experience, that helps increase the child's confidence, because if sometimes they would come to you with homework and say, hey, how do you solve this? Now you could break it down and solve for it for them, but sometimes what I like to do is, like somebody else was saying, you go further back, but also as you going through those steps, you show them, hey, this is how you solve for this. This is how you solve for this. Now, this is the relation that this specific problem that you has with everything that we just went through. The other thing that I really like to do too, and I think I say this a lot in many rooms that I'm in, and is using examples that relates to stuff that the child already have a lot of interest in. So let's say if they're interested in soccer, or if they're interested in, football, or whatever else they're interested in, Mario, whatever it is. So you use examples in that specific aspect where it's and where the example makes sense to the child and they understand it. Not only you teach the concept, but also after you teach them the concept and you start introducing examples that they're familiar with. And I find that this not only help them raise their confidence, but they also keep them very interested in what you're talking about, because you speak in their language. And I think somebody else mentioned that, I think it was Laura that mentioned that, make sure that you get someone who is actually, can relate to your child or being able to teach them. And that's very important. Another question that I wanted to ask you guys too, and this is from experience, is more like something that I experienced. When I was in school, I remember there was a lot of professors that had PhD, maybe 2 or 3 PhD in a specific subject. And I tell you, like some of them where it was hard for them to really explain the material in a way that we can understand it. On the other hand, we would have kids with like a master's degree was like they just show you how to do the stuff, and the math questions, or explain a topic to you, and it made more sense than somebody who had a 17 PhD and they were just teaching. I don't know if that's an experience that you guys have, especially you educators and stuff, like if that's something that you experience, maybe that some of the child that comes to you have a lot of difficulties in certain areas, but it's because the professors is so explaining in a way that's very, very advanced, where they're not coming down to earth to help them experience it. Is that something that you guys have experience with, Laura or Dr. Green? Yeah, go ahead.
I can speak to that.
Mhm.
My actual bachelor's is in economics and a minor in accounting.
Go ahead.
And I think some
if
of
you
my
could,
math
I don't know if you,
success
we can't.
I can
Oh, shit.
take math and frame it such that it's practical. I do have students who have teachers who are teaching over their heads and they cannot break it down. The other thing is that a majority of the students who I tutor are minority students. And so you have to take and be culturally sensitive and use words and things from the ethnomathematic perspective. So it is not uncommon for me to use record sales by artists like the Baby and the word problems that I create for my students to get a concept. But the minute that I incorporate that, I have their attention and they're engaged. And then we can go ahead and learn whatever it is that we need to learn. The other part of it is oftentimes students will say, well, when am I going to use this again? Because I have had real world experiences and education as a second career, I'm able to provide some feedback, and it does bring some sort of acceptance of I may actually use this again.
Okay, my academic background is actually mechanical engineering. So I did alternate certification to become a teacher. This was in New York. And I had professors. Well, all my professors had PhDs in, some area in engineering and such like that. No, they didn't teach the basics. The presumption is you're in college, you are ready to learn this, because everything says your readiness is there. And it's not always the case. So when I started teaching in the K-12 space, I think it was seventh graders first, and that's where I realized that I needed to, the level where I was thinking is not going to work for how I'm going to approach teaching these students. So how can I break it down? It took a while to learn that, but not so long that I couldn't reach my students. But yeah, you do have to break it down. Professors didn't do that for us. So we had to learn in their space. But when we look at K-12, we cannot say, well, the child has to learn in my space. And unfortunately, and especially I find that in Florida, that there are many teachers who teach like that. They have to learn in my space. This is the way I know how to do it, and that's how you're going to learn how to do it. And that's the only presentation of your information that I am going to accept. And that's one of the things I really do not like about the state of Florida. And my daughter has to go to school here. So as I feel as an educator, no matter how a student present their work to you, you should be ready to read it and say, this is a mathematically sound presentation. I accept your explanation and I accept your solution. And if we're going to be teachers, we have to be in that mindset and in that space to do so. It can't be my way or the highway. So I have a lot of issues with that. And I personally, like I tell people, many times, because we live near an Air Force base, so many times I have adult members of the Air Force do want to get promotion and they have to take exams, but they wouldn't go to one of the professors on base. They will come to me, and I'll say, well, yes, I think like an engineer, but I do not teach like one. And that not teaching like one is not to bring them into my space, but me enter their space and work with them to make them feel comfortable for one and make them believe that they can learn this. And most times I would actually say I have a good percentage rate of students learning. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for your input. One thing that
Dr. Thatch, can I ask what part of Florida you're in?
I'm in Northwest Florida, Valparaiso.
Okay, I'm just down the street in Panama City.
Oh my gosh, really? Isn't that interesting?
We need to connect offline.
Yeah, we should connect, definitely.
that's good. It looks like almost all of us are in Florida up here, except for Khalid.
You're in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I am. Laura used to be in Jacksonville too, right, Laura?
Yes, I used to live in Jacksonville, and then when I taught, it was in Lee County, Florida, in Fort Myers, and now I am in Louisiana. So
wow, I used to live in Lehigh and Fort Myers too. I lived there for about 5.5 years. What school did you teach at?
I taught at Lehigh Senior High. I was a teacher leader there.
Oh yeah, Lehigh Senior High is that's close. Yeah, that was close to my house. I didn't go there. But yeah, I know. Man, that's cool. Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that you that you were familiar with those areas. That's pretty cool. Now, one thing that I wanted to touch on, guys, is something that I hear a lot, especially when you teaching kids. The one thing that they tell you is that, how am I going to use this? Where else am I going to use this? And I think that, like the Green Johns, you touched on it a little bit. I wonder how you guys deal with that issue when a child tell you how I'm gonna use this. Where else am I gonna see this? Why do we need to learn this? And I have some stuff that I use myself, and I wanted to know what you guys normally do when a child say, hey, when am I gonna ever use this in life? And I wanted to start. Laura, maybe you could start and tell you guys, tell us what you do when that happens.
So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So sometimes if let's say you teaching a child, okay, this is the quadratic equation, this is how you solve it, and this is the best way to find the answers, and the child probably comes back and say, where am I going to use this? Maybe not so much for you if you're using like the ACT or the SAT. They probably say, okay, I'm just trying to learn this to go to college. But have you ever experienced something like that? Anyone who has can chime in. And
where
what do
am
you?
I gonna,
Like how do you? Am I going to see this? Ever see this in real life?
I do. In fact, one of the things that students have trouble with is like a geometry question that asks to find the area of an uneven, like a square and a rectangle with a little part taken out of it. And I'll talk to them, my students, about my own experience trying to calculate how much flooring I needed to buy in order to cover my room and the closet, which was an additional space. So I told them exactly how I did it, how I measured, and how what we're learning here is something that I would use in real life. I love to compare things to real life. When we're talking about fractions, I talk about recipes that I've used that. Ratios, things like that. So whenever you can tell a story and connect it to something that they would do in real life, certainly matters. And an example, even though this isn't real life, like painting a room or figuring out the floor, matrices. So matrices in Louisiana are not taught for our state test, but they are on the ACT. So when I teach students how to deal with them, and then I tell them, now, why does this even exist? It exists officially as an easier way to solve simultaneous equations. This is just a strategy to solve simultaneous equations, and then they understand it. Or, for example, pi. we had a whole conversation based on a student asking me. I never used to tell this, but students were like, well, what is the whole deal with pi anyway? And so we looked it up together, and I showed them, okay, anything times pi is, that's how it works. What was it? The ratio, the diameter times pi, no matter what size it is always going to be the circumference. I actually forgot it right now. But even when it's kind of a pure math geeky thing, when they understand the reason behind it, it's kind of cool.
Nice. That's good. Anybody else want to before we take someone else, and I see Kenny, you're in the room. Kenny, I wanted to know if you could talk to us a little bit about the kind of stuff that you do. I see that you're an educator too, and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, and I wanted to to learn a little bit about you and what kind of stuff that you do, and maybe take 30 to 45 seconds and talk to us about yourself. Can you hear me?
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate you for having this space. Such an important conversation to have. So, I'm Kenny. I'm actually an educator in Georgia. I teach 7th grade math. Contracted to work with Georgia Department of Education. We've worked on rewriting our standards for the state. I think we've adapted the Common Core standards to be the Georgia Performance Standards. A few states have done that as well. They make adjustments. So we're in the process of helping to rewrite, starting with the 6th grade content, helping to rewrite curriculum and help educators just understand the content better, help with that self-efficacy, because if teachers understand it better, students can understand it better. So that's where I am right now. I was listening to a few, and I just had to come up to say, I think Khalid was right about we need an overhaul in education. I think a lot of these things are backwards. They give us standards that we have to teach, and then we try to make them fit to real-world applications. When if you give a child a real-world application without any expectation of what tool to use or what strategy to use, it's interesting to figure out what patterns they come up with, how they solve those problems, and how naturally they solve problems without the guidance of this is the tool you need to use, this is the strategy you need to use. And the truth is, we just don't have enough educators who are comfortable enough with the content to, I can't remember her name, La, like she was saying, just being able to say, it's okay if you don't do it my way. It's okay if you have another way to solve it, because that is the true purpose of math, is to understand patterns, to make your own way, to solve problems logically. And when you find those patterns and solve them, it's just interesting how we as education, we've just started to mass produce education. This has to be taught at this grade level. This has to be connected at this grade level. You just be amazed at how students, like Laura was saying earlier, given that example with, how many tiles, you need for your floor to redo your floor, you'd be amazed at what students do to try to figure something out like that. But the big issue is the curriculum people don't talk to the test writing people. What happens is the curriculum, educators or professionals write the curriculum, and then the test takers, the test makers, they take what we write, and they try to come up with what they feel is the best for an assessment purposes. But we can't be creative as educators if the tests are not creative as well. You see what I'm saying? So I'm glad you have the space to talk about bringing up a child's confidence in math. And it's just being creative, allowing kids to come up with their own patterns. Don't always force the equation. Don't always force the problem on students. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kenny, for timing in. To continue what you were saying, I remember many times where I would, a lot of times, you would have kids who would come up with a certain way to solve, and maybe because they learned it from a teacher, they would show you a different way. It's like, hey, you ever thought about doing it this way? And that's just something that you never know before. Now, one thing I wanted to add is it's kind of like very different from what you were saying. It's very different from us. Like as adult, if you especially people who are like entrepreneurs and stuff like that. If you have your own business, a lot of times you go through different trial and errors, and eventually you create a system that you you use to help, all the people will follow that system, and you said, okay, I came up with that, this is really good. But in school, I think what's the idea is everything is already created for you. You have to follow it, and I think that's very different. Those are two very different way of thinking. The first one is, okay, let me see what I can come up with from my experience, from learning a bunch of stuff that I put it together, and then eventually I find something that works, and I say, okay, this is it. But not in school, they already give you that. And I think part of the idea is, we go back to, the reason why school were created in the first place. And I think if you can trace it back to that, it will tell you a whole lot about why we have to follow a certain pattern, a certain way of doing things. And I think what you're saying is very important. Anybody else wanted to add to what Kenny was saying? Anyone? And Khalid, are you still here? Uh-oh.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask
Yes,
you
I
what
am.
Kenny
I
was
am
saying.
here.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Law. Khalid, I'm gonna ask you a
Yeah.
specific question after that. Go ahead, Law.
Okay. Actually, I can talk a little bit towards what Khalid is doing as well. But Kenny, yes, I totally agree with you on that. How students see patterns, how we can help them develop those, those ideas, but patterns and where they are and what they are, and also too, and again, coming directly from the child, from the student, not from us. Give them that open space. And I know we're all educators here, and my work is based off of I'm more like, let's say, Vygotsky and a little bit of Piaget. Piaget just wanted them to just sit and explore. We cannot let them just sit and explore, because that's when we open the field to misconceptions that people hold on to for the longest time. We have to intervene. We have to interact with them, as Vygotsky would say. Question them, direct them, know when to intervene, know when to step back, know when to teach, know when to let them work independently, and create those ways of thinking, but with direction, so that we're not allowing them to just go off and hold on to things that just do not work. The misconceptions that we know can be there all the time, and persevere throughout their learning. And with Khalid, you said you are in England, you're in the UK. I was born in Guyana, which is South America, which was a British colony. So I finished my primary school and just started high school before we came to the United States. That system of learning is a sink or swim. Nobody's there holding your hand and directing you and getting you to where you want to go. And all those exams that the students have to take. Like, for example, we take exams, like in Guyana, you take exams to get into high school. We don't have middle school. We go to high school. We take exams. So from age 10 to 12, they're sorting you out as to what path you're going to take for professional. We take these common interest exams. And those common interest exams could decide whether you go to the best schools or the not so great schools. And then those schools are passed. The best schools are fully academic. Those are for people who want to become, lawyers, including teachers, because teachers are more respected there, doctors, and all of those things. So, but if you do not score well on those exams, and the school that you now attend, it's like you don't have a way back to get into a fully academic high school if you don't score, get that grade. So instead of making it like like this big general thing, everybody has to take this exam. Everybody's path is going to be determined. Whereas if you approach education in a more individualized arena, the child who doesn't score in the top later on can get there at his or her own pace, not be forced upon general curriculum or the general idea of what the country decides education is. and how they are going to proceed